exciting to be with you for this Frank Islam Athenaeum Symposia, and it's a distinct honor and privilege to be introducing the main presenter and this distinguished panel. I'm going to be sticking to my notes too, so we have plenty of time for them. In our confused and conflicted world, we know there are times and occasions when religion is part of the problem. Whether in the Middle East or Asia and Africa, or particularly today in Central African Republic, we find grave examples of religion being among the sources of division and violence. In the United States, faith communities can be found on both sides of civil rights issues. And we can recall when the Quran was burned and violence occurred abroad. Most recently, we think of the deaths of 2 young children by demon assassins, which raise profound questions regarding the role of religion. At the same time, I know of no other sector within any culture holding greater potential for healing, reconciling, envisioning, and achieving justice, which is a prerequisite to peace, than religion. The United States Institute of Peace reports significant progress through interfaith dialogue in Burma, Sri Lanka, Israel, Palestine, and Nigeria. The State Department recently announced the creation of an Office for Religious Engagement headed by Sean Casey from Wesley Theological Seminary that promotes interfaith dialogue. Thus, tonight's topic, interfaith dialogue, its significance in public policy and the White House is especially relevant, and no one could give us greater insight into its dynamics than Mr. Paul Monteiro. As the former Associate Director of the White House Office of Public Engagement and Intergovernmental Affairs, he's been living day and night at the nexus of faith and public policy. I know from personal experience that he has been immersed in the life of diverse faith communities, as well as in the debates ranging from healthcare to the integration of immigrants and from poverty to economic inequity. In short, we have much to learn from this man who makes his former law professor, our county executive, Isaiah Leggett, and all the rest of us who know Paul, very grateful and proud for your service. Today, he is a partner with Values Partnerships that helps foundations, nonprofits, and businesses partner with faith-based organizations in pursuing the common good. Fortunately, you have biographical sketches because I do not have the time to do justice to introducing either Mr. Monteiro or the members of this distinguished panel. Let me simply say that the presentations will be highly spirited and relevant to the life of Montgomery County. The only one not living here is Imam Yakyahindi. He is the second from your right. Yes, raise his hand. He's come down all the way from Frederick this evening. And he is, I've been having that time to talk about how you're...
I am moving to Montgomery County.
Yes. And perhaps the primary reason it's going to be easier to get to his place of work as the Muslim chaplain at Georgetown University, but I'm looking forward to this so he can become even more engaged in interfaith relations as he already is here in Montgomery County. He is an internationally renowned religious scholar. So far, it's just, 63 countries? I expect next time around it'll be closer to 70. And founder and president of the Clergy Beyond Borders. Which brings me then to his teammate, Rabbi Gerald Serrata, better known as Rabbi Jerry, who is the executive director of Clergy Beyond Borders and former chair of the Board of Chaplains at George Washington University. You may look forward to hearing about their interfaith caravans throughout the state of Maryland and ongoing work today to form a statewide interfaith network for responding to all acts of hate and violence in the state of Maryland. Clearly, his work with the Rabbis for Human Rights and the board of the Faith and Politics Institute more than qualify him to be addressing tonight's topic. The Reverend Dr. Stephanie Nagley, you will note, has served across the country at intersections such as Kent State University, La Jolla, California, and Capitol Hill, where the relationship between faith and life have come into clear focus. Fortunately for us, she's now rector at St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Bethesda that's well known for its advocacy in social justice and interfaith relations. The Reverend Dr. Wilson Gunn, the far right, also brings remarkable academic credentials together with living and serving in diverse parts of our country before settling in Washington. As the General Presbyter for the National Capital Presbytery with an office in Rockville, he shepherds 110 congregations with 32,000 members, serving a wide variety of needs and advocating for justice and peace. When I retired from serving a Presbyterian in the United Church of Christ parish some years ago, Wilson advised me to be sure to invest more time in interfaith relations. So I can attest to the wisdom of his guidance, which leads to his being the guide for the panel following the presentation.
If all my pastors took direction like that, golly.
Thank you. So now let us welcome these extraordinarily qualified and committed interfaith voices with a round of applause as Mr. Paul Monteiro comes to address us on this topic.
Thank you, Reverend Caseman. I'm not sure if, is this on? Can you hear me? Great. Well, thank you very much for having me. I want to thank, I know Dr. Rye's not here, but I want to thank him for giving me the opportunity to speak to you tonight, and also for my friend Frank Islam, who's traveling overseas as well, for inviting me to participate in this series. I was last here when Mr. Gandhi was speaking, so you know, it's a hard act to follow with him, but I'll do my best. Because I came to listen mostly, I'll run through a quick PowerPoint, give you some of the top-line issues that I dealt with in my almost 5 years at the White House that I think are relevant for our conversation tonight, and then quickly pivot to the expert panel to my left, because you really have some everyday practitioners who are living some of the things that we would work on from a political and policy side, but these are folks on the front lines of things. So I'll walk through this PowerPoint, and we'll just go to the panel and then get to your questions or comments as quickly as possible. Is that okay? Okay, we'll try to keep it interactive as much as possible. And they gave me this fancy laser pointer to walk through my PowerPoint with you. But I do want to thank my girlfriend Jamie and my friend Carlisle for coming. I'm not sure if my mom's here, but she said she was coming as well. My mother actually went to Montgomery College. I remember when I was about 5 or 6, she went to Tacoma Park. And I have memories of playing in the courtyard because daycare was expensive, but seeing her in class while she was studying, and I was out having a great time in the courtyard playing with Matchbox cars. But it's really great to be here at a college that did a lot for me and my family, so I'm proud to be here. So, Stronger Together, Faith and Community Partnerships. Wanted to start with sort of the big picture in terms of the religious landscape around the world. And again, this is why I want to get to our panel, because these are folks, especially in the case of Rabbi Jerry and Imam Hendi, traveling the world looking at how do we reconcile differences across divisions of religious lines. So around the world, this is 2010, and anyone who's interested in this space, even vaguely, between the Pew Forum and Gallup, there's amazing data on the religious landscape of, you can sort by country, and you can certainly sort by faith. So take a look. A lot of my data from tonight is going to be drawn from the Pew Research Center's studies. But obviously, so you have a very simple pie graph here showing the largest Christians, Muslims, Hindus, unaffiliated, which I'll talk about in a second, and then other religions, much smaller but no less important. And obviously at the White House, when we were dealing with a lot of international issues that I'll talk about later in the presentation, religious conflict or misunderstanding was often in some way related to or connected to those conflicts. In the United States, you have religious observance, and this is helpful in terms of for example, for political purposes, you could tell a Romney voter by church attendance. Those who were more likely to go to church at least once a week were more likely to vote Republican. And so at least in 2012. So religious observance is always helpful for us to see in terms of how frequently are folks going to their house of worship. It's one thing for folks to identify as, I'm a member of this tradition, or I'm a member of no tradition at all, in terms of the unaffiliated. But it's really telling to see how often do they actually attend. I mean, I'm sure some folks can relate to, you belong to a faith tradition, but do you actually go to the congregation on a regular basis? Things get different. So Jehovah's Witnesses obviously lead the pack in terms of their most frequent attendees, and you can see how it trends downward to the unaffiliated, who go about 5%, of them go weekly or more frequently. This is one of the graphs that I think gets a lot of press coverage, and it's one of the things I see a lot of folks pontificating about or predicting what's going to happen in the future. And this is from 2010, so it's a little dated, but you see in the religious landscape, the Protestants that used to be about 62% back in 1972 are trending downward to 51% now in 2010. Catholics generally holding steady, 25%, but if you look sort of behind those numbers, Catholics have actually lost a significant amount of followers. The difference with Catholics, where others are losing members, they're getting older, passing away, or simply not going anymore, Catholics have lost a lot, but they've replaced them all, mostly with immigrants from other countries in the United States. And there's a lot of reasons behind why that is the case, but they still remain a very solid block of Americans. And again, the nones, the folks who are unaffiliated, atheist, agnostic, I don't belong to any tradition, don't label me, quickly growing. And that's a interesting community to work with. And in my time at the White House, we did a lot of work engaging the community of folks that identify themselves as, I am unaffiliated. I do not belong to a church or a mosque or a synagogue or any religious tradition. I simply want to be known as a person. And as you can see, sort of a nice trend line going up, as getting close to 20% in 2012. And that's something that could be very consequential in the years to come as the religious landscape of the country changes. And again, I'm just hitting sort of the top points, and then we can talk about anything you'd like to or anything else that I didn't talk about. But this is a key issue to pay attention to. When you're talking about the background of the unaffiliated, you can see the sort of breakdown. A lot of folks who maybe have grown up in a particular religious tradition and then choose to become unaffiliated and not ascribe to a particular belief system or faith tradition. Interreligious marriage is also another interesting trend to see as things go in this country, where maybe 50, 60 years ago, these rates were much, much lower. Catholics would marry Catholics. Presbyterians would marry Presbyterians, and so on and so forth. You're starting to see very significant rates of interreligious marriage where, especially among millennials, that is not seen as a bar to marrying someone in many cases, where maybe 60 years ago it was anathema. So you have high rates of interreligious marriage when it comes to mainline Protestants, Orthodox. It gets smaller and smaller as you deal with other communities, but it's a trend to pay attention to in terms of the religious makeup of our country. And I'm sort of just setting the table because it's hard to talk about religious dialogue or interfaith dialogue when you don't have a sort of, at least a context of how big these communities are or who we're talking about. So starting with my time at the White House, I'll just talk about briefly. One of the things the president started when he came into office in 2009 was establishing an advisory council of 25 faith-based leaders to give him advice and counsel on different issues related to the faith-based community or issues of public policy. It had never existed before. The 25 members were from diverse religious traditions. As you can see by this picture, this is some of the membership of the second council. But the president was very interested in hearing from the voice of the faith community because that was his background. A lot of people talk about Senator Obama before he was president. He was in Chicago working the streets as a community organizer. What a lot of times they leave out is he was a community organizer funded in large part by a grant from the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. His boss was a priest. His office was in a church, and they were working on issues of health care, poverty, and job training on the south side of Chicago. So he intimately had an appreciation for the skill set, the insights, and the guidance that faith leaders could give him. So the White House Office of Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships, how many of you have heard of this office? Okay, so most folks have not heard of it, and that's okay too. So I was not in this office, but a lot of times people had questions about it because I was the faith outreach person for the White House. My job was to be the front door to any faith leader or unaffiliated leader who wanted to be in contact with the White House on a policy issue. The thing about the faith community or belief community is they care about every issue you can think of, and we'll get to that in a second. But the purpose of the faith-based office, here it is in black and white, building bridges between the federal government and nonprofit organizations, both secular and faith-based. It was called faith-based and neighborhood partnerships because they deal with religious organizations as well as the Boys and Girls Clubs of America or Big Brothers Big Sisters, because they're all working on the same issues, but they're coming at it either from a faith perspective or a sort of a public policy perspective. So the faith-based office was established by the Bush administration, and it was pretty often maligned, I think, in terms of press anyway. And when the president came into office, before he was elected, he made it clear if he was elected, he would not close this office. He would actually work to expand it and reform it, because there were some things that were happening in the office that weren't as efficient and certainly weren't as transparent as they could have been. So when he came in, the first executive order he signed was reforming the faith-based office, and this is the purpose. So his vision in setting up this new office was engaging faith communities into economic recovery. Again, this was 2009. The economy is going down pretty quickly. A lot of folks are losing jobs, homes, hope. So faith communities, because they're on the bleeding edges of a lot of these challenges, dealing with people showing up every week saying, can you help me? I'm about to lose my home, or I lost my job and my health insurance. The first priority for engaging faith communities was on economic recovery issues, working together to reduce poverty, which is something I think since time immemorial faith groups have worked on. Exploring alternatives to abortion. This was another sort of bridge-building initiative the president wanted to be a part of the faith-based office. Think about traditional democratic politics. Usually the view on abortion is pretty clear in terms of a woman's right to choose, but it's an issue that the president, when he was a candidate, talked pretty extensively about. One of those things that are often used to divide people, instead of trying to figure out, well, what can we do about the issue that everyone says they want to do something about? So working with faith-based organizations as well as women's groups to figure out what are alternative ways to give women a pathway to do something other than abort an unplanned or unwanted pregnancy. Looking at adoption, looking at providing more social services, things of that nature. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Promoting responsible fatherhood and mentoring. This is something that was very personal to the president because his dad was not around. But looking at the trend line in America, and I mean in the African American community, about 73% of African American households have a father that's not there, which is crisis levels. And it's not just the African American community, but in so many communities where fathers are not there or physically present but not actually present in the raising and training of the children. So that was another key part. You'll pay attention to the news tomorrow. The president's going to make a major announcement on that front with a lot of private sector partners at the White House tomorrow afternoon. Expanding interfaith dialogue. This was something that I'll spend the rest of my time on because this was something the president led with. It's listed last, but it was his first priority. Again, looking at why is there so much division based on misunderstanding or a lack of awareness. Hey, Mom, come on in. My mom just got here, my grandmother too. All right. Interfaith dialogue. So that's what we're talking about tonight. And in the last couple of years, simply because the numbers are getting horrible, combating human trafficking at home and abroad. And you may have seen a lot of coverage on this around the Super Bowl because unfortunately large sporting events are prime time for traffickers selling adults and or children. Human trafficking is now a key focus of the faith-based office and the White House in their work with the faith-based community. And then expanded collaborations. During the Bush administration, there were 11 agencies that had faith-based centers. Now it's about 14. And all of these agencies, agriculture, faith groups, and hunger, commerce, faith groups, and job opportunities and small businesses, Department of Education, faith groups and parochial schools, faith groups and challenges to curriculum that portray religious groups in a certain light, often not a good one. So on and on, you can look at all of these departments they actually have agency centers that are set up to engage faith-based and neighborhood organizations on societal challenges and public policy. And the Interfaith Community Service, the President's Campus Challenge. How many of you have heard of this? A few? Okay. I'm glad I came. So this was something, it's really Ibu Patel with the Interfaith Youth Corps in Chicago. He's done some great work in this space looking at, on a college campus, we've done a pretty good job as a country about talking about, I'm black, you're white. Maybe even, you know, someone's heterosexual, someone's homosexual. Or somebody's from this background economically, somebody's from this background economically, geographically, on and on and on. The one place where it's actually still difficult on a college campus, again, leaders of tomorrow who are learning sitting next to one another, is the religious identity, where there hasn't been a systematic way for future leaders sitting on a college campus to talk to one another about their faith tradition, their religious background, their vision of themselves, this life, the afterlife, and their obligations to their neighbor, if any. So the President's Campus Challenge is, well, think about any number of student groups on campus. They're probably all doing community service. So Hillel's going to go clean a park. You know, the Muslim Student Association is going to go feed the homeless. You know, the Catholic Student Association is going to go, you know, to a soup kitchen or read to veterans. But they're doing them on their own. So why not use this initiative to say, if you're all going to do service together, why don't you, or if you're all going to do service, you should do it together. And that's what the Campus Challenge is about. Convening all of the student groups, faith-based or even secular, that want to do community service and working on projects together with the hope of, as you work together to serve, you get to know one another, and by extension, you get to know more about that person's religious identity, something that animates what they do in their life. So the President's Campus Challenge is about 4 years old now. It's going very, very well. I encourage all of you to check it out online and get involved if you haven't already. But in terms of faith-based organizations working in any space, you can think about tornado, sort of hurricanes, disaster relief, domestically, internationally, Haiti and other places, as we've had no shortage of international tragedies, man-made or otherwise, or natural disasters. Global interfaith dialogue, a picture from Tahrir Square in 2011 in Egypt. Obviously, it has not continued to go as well as when this picture was taken, but Muslims, actually Coptic Christians, circling Muslims who were praying and protecting their right to pray in Cairo. This is the Caravan of Hope. We have two of our folks here today, but traveling the country to promote interfaith dialogue, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, or otherwise, to engage one another, to get to know one another. Fighting poverty, Nuns on the Bus, if anyone remembers that campaign from a year or so ago. Traveling the country looking at the House of Representatives budget. Working for gun safety here at the National Cathedral, really coming together in a strong way after Newtown, but have been working on this issue for a long time before that. Interfaith Immigration Coalition working on common sense immigration reform right now, fasting across America. There was a major fast continuing to go on the Mall, a hunger strike, or a fasting. Intra-faith efforts, too, for immigration reform. That's a good example of one of those issues where I haven't found a faith group that is opposed to immigration reform. What they break down along is, well, where do you start and how do you do it? What are the tactics? So this was a group with some conservative Christian leaders trying to get their support for immigration reform this Congress. Obviously, Interfaith Coalition formed around healthcare, continues to exist around protecting the Affordable Care Act. The Washington Interreligious Staff Community is a great umbrella group that we worked with at the White House that was so many different religious communities pushing in the same direction on the need for healthcare reform. And to be candid, obviously faith communities in opposition to the Affordable Care Act, where you have, this is the Fortnight of Freedom campaign hosted largely by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, opposing the Affordable Care Act because of probably the contraception mandate and other things. National security implications, as Reverend Caseman talked about. Pastor Terry Jones, and I wish this was a joke, but it wasn't. For the last 4 years, on 9/11, he hosts International Burn a Quran Day. This is a man who has a church of about 20 people, including his relatives, in Florida, And every year he does this. And the national security implications, especially in the first year that he did it, were that people died because of this. He would do this, and folks in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other places, Muslim majority countries, would report on this pastor doing that. And in other countries, I mean, they don't have maybe as good of a sense of the religious landscape in the United States, so the assumption is he is the typical American pastor. And this is what typical Christians do. They burn Qurans. Deeply offensive, protests resulted, people died. I remember the first year, scrambling to get statements from religious leaders here in the United States, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, condemning him for doing this, saying we do not accept this as a legitimate way to speak, but the First Amendment allows them to do it, but we disagree. Taking those statements, having them translated by the State Department, and then sending them out to our embassies in places like Afghanistan and Pakistan to try and make the case to folks and citizens of those nations, this is not something the United States supports as a country. This is a lone actor doing something that the press is all over, making it seem like this is a very normal thing to do in America. So Pastor Terry Jones, shoulder to shoulder, the Peter King hearings, the first time ever that the Congress has actually done a hearing on radicalization of a religious community. There has never been congressional oversight that investigated explicitly a religious community. Peter King hosted hearings a few years ago on radicalization in the Muslim American community. And that led to the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign, which was Muslims, Christians, and other communities coming together to say, we stand shoulder to shoulder with one another, and no religious community should be targeted by the government or anyone else because of their beliefs or by myths. You have continued issues with hate crimes, anti-religious bias. Religion is about 19% in 2012, so there's about 1,100 cases reported, so many more that aren't reported, of hate crimes based on religion. Interfaith engagement, I always like this picture because it's the Easter egg roll. The Easter egg roll was probably the most popular among non-Christians because everyone wants to come roll eggs on the South Lawn. So we would try to use the White House as a place to say, whatever the holiday, everyone's welcome. The Easter prayer breakfast, which were largely Christian, but we had folks from other religious communities there. The White House Passover Seder, again, diverse. The first ever recognition of the first guru in Sikhism's birth at the White House. Marking Diwali with the First Lady. Breaking the fast during Ramadan with the President. Deepening relationships with the African American clergy, as diverse as it is. And in terms of future trends, in my last minute, just wrapping it up, back to where I started in terms of, this question sort of says, if you ask the average person, do you think religion is, as a whole, increasing influence on American life or losing its influence? And the trend line of losing its influence is very high now, 77%, increasing influence 20% last year. I think that's the perception. I disagree with it, though, and this is part of the reason why. I do see across religious communities, certainly folks redefining what their faith walk should look like in their life. And to be specific, however your parents may have gone to their house of worship, if they went at all, you still believe in sort of the fundamental tenets of it, maybe, just by the numbers, but you practice it on your own terms. More focused on public service, community service, helping the least of these, helping folks who are vulnerable, working with folks who need a hand up, not so much focusing on the political part of it. And that's one reason why you see the growth of the unaffiliated is because many times religion has been conflated with politics, specifically conservative politics. And as young people have said, I don't actually ascribe to those political views, so I'm not religious because I conflate them as being the same thing. And he is obviously Times Person of the Year last year, a good example of folks who are changing things up, where showing a different way to practice the faith that you profess. Who knows where we go from here, but interfaith dialogue has been very important in everything we've done at the White House. I left in November, so I'm speaking based on my experience up to that point. But I look forward to your questions, and now I'll turn it over to our panel to share with you as well. Thank you.
I'll call upon Rabbi Sarada to address.
We're going to speak from here?
Yeah, we'll speak from here, and you'll go first, and then Reverend Nagli will go next, and Imam Hindi next.
Well, it's an honor to be here with Paul Montero's mother and grandmother. Your son and your grandson did very well, didn't he? And
Thanks a lot.
Before you came, he said that you had been a student here at Montgomery College. I'm delighted to be here also. I'm invited to be invited back, which means that the students who were here the last time I spoke on a much larger panel were willing to hear me again. So I'm again very happy to be here. We have only about 5 minutes apiece to comment. I was delighted to see that slide from the caravan of reconciliation that Clergy Beyond Borders led throughout the United States in the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 tragedy, stopped in front of the Capitol. That's where that bus was, and you probably couldn't see where you were. The image that was on that bus, on that small van, was an image of an ark. Our symbol of what we do in Clergy Beyond Borders is Noah's Ark. There's a movie about to come out with Liam Neeson playing Noah. I think it's Liam Neeson. That's a very important story for a number of reasons. But the fact is, it's a story in the scriptures that's shared actually between Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. But it describes our current situation, not just a situation of biblical times. We are all on one ark together. Underneath that picture, we had the slogan, "One Ark, One Humanity." The ark is a little bit bigger than that ark you'll see in the movie. It's about the size of the planet Earth. But anything that happens in one portion of that ark is going to impact on the rest of the humanity. And that's why it's important to do this interfaith work that was described here very eloquently by Paul, and the work that we tried to do within Clergy Beyond Borders. Now, interestingly, you would think that, on first blush, thinking about it, that who would be opposed to interfaith dialogue and common interfaith work? Our experience as we go around, we just finished, Reverend Caseman was with us and he mentioned it, we just finished a caravan reconciliation in the state of Maryland. And both in that caravan and our previous caravan, the people who opposed us were people who were threatened within their own tradition. If you get together with folks from another tradition, somehow that will dilute your own faith. That isn't our experience when we travel together, and that's not what interfaith dialogue is about. It's not trying to homogenize faith, it's trying to strengthen faith and empower people of faith in all the areas that Paul Monteiro mentioned of promoting social justice. I could speak, I'm going to try and speak for 1 minute of the Jewish perspective, but each of us can uniquely talk about the resources both for social justice and healing of humanity within our tradition, but we would learn from each other how to do them more effectively. That's really what I think is the outcome of interfaith dialogue. When we speak with Buddhists and Hindus and Sikhs and other religions, we learn more about ourselves, we empower ourselves, and we have a new framework to be inspired to go out and do God's work. In my tradition, we have a concept of tikkun olam, of repairing the world. The world we live in looks, from an obvious perspective, as if it's broken. And God has provided us a broken world. It's our obligation to repair that world. We have a distinction. There's a word that's shared in Hebrew and in Arabic that people usually translate as charity, tzedakah, tzedakah. And there is an obligation of a religious person, I think of any person of morality and spirituality, to help the needy. But the root of the word tzedakah, which means righteous giving in effect, is tzedek, justice. So that when I see the religious community called to work on poverty, that is in fact to help feed the poor, but that's a much broader subject. That's how to change the social structure so we eliminate poverty. That's to work on issues like minimum wage. It's to work on equal pay for equal work. Those are religious. Does that mean I have 1 minute left?
Yeah.
I thought you were telling me I spoke for a minute. Okay. Okay. Let me just mention the areas that we cooperate on in public policy that are obvious that come from a religious base. One is trafficking, as Paul mentioned. Stewardship is a really important, or creation care, as it's called in some of the evangelical Protestant community. That's something that all of us have a story of creation, and we have a responsibility to be stewards and to care for creation, or that boat is going to sink. Issues of human rights are religious issues. If we are created in the image of God, male and female, which is the way it's expressed in the Hebrew scriptures that we share with Christianity, and which exists in other forms in Islam and many other traditions, if we are all created in the image of God, male and female, then human rights is a religious obligation. I hope at some point in your studies you come across the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which is commemorated every year on the passing of it is commemorated on December 10th. I think it is the most profound religious document of the last century, and it's important to understand that those rights, not so frequently stressed in our society as they are in other countries, include economic rights. They're not just civil liberties and civil rights and equality. They're economic rights, and those are among the religious issues that we're involved in. Another obvious corollary of that is the opposition to torture and cruel and inhumane treatment and forms of solitary confinement. Religious organizations working together through the National Religious Campaign Against Torture have particularly focused on those, because those are probably the biggest wound in the religious life of this society and around the world where those practices still exist. So there's a menu of options. I started with the story of Noah's Ark. There's a vision in the prophet Isaiah of all of humanity focused in worshiping in their own fashion, not that they would become Jewish and suddenly the 0.2% of the world population would be 100%. No, that all the people would worship together in their own way, in their own rooms. The image of the temple in the future time in Isaiah is an image that all people will come and pray, but each in their own way. And by doing that, we will learn how to pray better, and we'll learn how to do justice better.
Thank you. Reverend Nagley.
Well, thank you. Very great, thanks. I'm not sure I can say it any better than Jerry's already said it. Thank you for inviting me to this extraordinary evening with you. I'm going to bring it down to the ground level just a little bit and just talk about the local church. And Paul, two things you said really struck me: redefining the faith walk and conflation with conservative politics. And when I think of interfaith dialogue, I think certainly of the people gathered up here, but I'm also thinking about the nuns, as you called them. That's an interfaith, part of this interfaith group is those nuns. And taking it down to the ground level, getting down into the experience of my tradition, the Christian tradition in the church, what we spend a lot of time on is not your grandmother's church. What we spend time on is what you were just talking about, Jerry, in so many ways, this idea of radical hospitality and extravagant hospitality, that none of us here, I don't think, can claim to have the absolute truth. And so only by dialogue together do we begin to understand the fullness of God. It's like a bunch of blind people in a room with an elephant, and each of us have a hand on one part of the elephant, but none of us fully understand what that energy, that consciousness that we call God looks like. So in my experience, just as a local parish priest, we spend a lot of time encouraging conversation and doubt and wonder and uncertainty so that we can have that openness to this thing we call God that Jerry and the Imam and Wilson and I and Paul all share in various kinds of ways. So we do that, and often in my experience we'll have a Jewish prayer. We'll have a Buddhist prayer. We'll make sure that people understand that we don't have the full answer in our particular tradition. I think a lot about the relevancy of the church right now. And as I see that diving green line, I wonder, how do we speak to our society and our culture in a way that makes sense? In a way that people can also appreciate this journey that you and I share together to find some meaning, to find some way to heighten our sense of caring for one another and being in relationship with each other, and understanding that given all our diversity and difference, there is some commonalities we share that we want to provide a world so that, and another way to say what you said is, we can open up the world so more goodness can abound, that we can break open space so people can really let their goodness come out. So in that ground level experience, what we do frequently is remind ourselves of the promises that were made for us in our Christian initiation, our baptism. So we promised to respect the dignity of every human being and to work on justice and peace. That was our promise. And so I would just say, no matter what it takes and how we get there, and quite frankly, no matter what parts of the tradition I have to eject to allow that to happen, that's where the church is relevant in today's world and how we can be a part of this extraordinary experience of trying to understand our life together as human beings. So,
thank you.
I'm going to give my minute to the Imam.
Imam Hindi. I think he likes the podium.
I learned in America that America is the land of freedom. I do not want to be limited by the boundaries of a chair. My friends, my sisters, my brothers, it is my honor to have been asked to speak before you today on an issue that is quite important to my heart. I always say, if you were to look into my blood, you would not only see white and red cells, but you will also see cells written on them, interfaith relations cells. But I really believe that that is what we have to do, all of us. Interfaith dialogue is not a political strategy. It is not a point on a platform for a political party running for office. Interfaith dialogue is the choice of every human being, I believe. But at the end of the day, we are all in this together, whether fighting the painful realities of poverty in Africa, the painful reality of millions of Americans who do not have access to health care, or fighting the civil wars in Syria or in Libya or in Egypt or in so many other places. We are all in this together. Back in the 60s, it was not only Protestants fighting for civil liberties. It was the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians. It was the atheists and the humanists. It was all Americans, the black and the white, the brown and the yellow. It was the men and the women. It was churchgoers and those who did not like churchgoers. All were marching together in Alabama, in Mississippi, and across America saying civil liberties for all. That is interfaith dialogue. And that is what we are to do. That is what will change public policy. That is what changes attitudes and cultures that we need to change in America and across the globe. After all, we are up against two things: fear and ignorance. Fear of the other, that we can only confront when we know about the other, and we can only know about the other when we can work with the other on issues about which we are passionate. I can know the true beautiful spirit of the Catholic Church when it comes to the poor when I am in the field fighting for the poor. Back under the Bush administration, I was a part of an organization that worked for a bread for the poor, for the world. And we worked very closely with the Bush administration in order to increase aid to Africa. And it was increased from $3.1 billion to $5.2, I think, billion. It was done because of the engagement of the entire interfaith community in the United States of America. Everyone came on board for that cause. So we were able to confront realities and change realities because we worked together. Islamophobia or any phobia in America, how can you fight it? Muslims alone cannot fight it. But the Christians with Jews and Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus can fight it. And we can change public policy, and we can change public perception, and we can change the culture, but we can only do it when we do it together. As Paul said, the burning of the Quran experience, it was changed because Christian, Jews, and Muslim communities worked together. I was myself invited to a program of 700 American Christians, Jews, and Muslims in Tennessee, to a program called Burn a Candle, Not a Quran. That is America. Yes, you can go. Yes, yes, do it. You know, give America a credit. When priests and pastors and imams and rabbis met in Washington, D.C. to say that is not the America we want, that is not the America we like. Working together. I'm about to finish. Tell you of two specific projects. In April, in a month and a half from now, I will be leading a delegation made of Christian and Muslim leaders. And we will be going to Amman, Jordan. We'll be going into Israel and Palestine to celebrate Easter. And imagine when you have imams, Muslim leaders, celebrating a unique Christian holiday in the Holy Land. Why are we doing this? We are saying to our Christian brothers and sisters, we Muslims care about the future of Christianity in the Arab and Muslim world. And here we're traveling from America to the Middle East to say to Christians, we care about you too. We care about the future of Christianity in the Arab and the Muslim world. So we are working together. We are working on another caravan that will be traveling from Egypt through Sinai into Jordan, into Jerusalem, following the trip of Moses. However, we will do it in this case, not only the Jews alone, not only the Christians alone, not only the Muslims alone. All of us will be on that bus traveling for 2 weeks, trying to change public policies, public perceptions, and culture. How? Together. When we traveled in America for 2 weeks, 13 states, 18 cities, 41 stops, 8,200 miles, our goal was to tell America, America is a country for all, by all, and will continue to do so. That is what makes America great. We will never allow anyone to step on any religious community or any community at all, and we will do that together. Our caravan in the state of Maryland, for 4 days was intended to bring together law enforcement agencies, educators, media, and the clergy, saying, one Maryland, one people, one caravan, one ark, one destiny. Together we stand, united we stand, divided we fall. So my sisters, my brothers, my friends, interfaith dialogue can bring us together to overcome the voices that have divided us with voices that want us to work together. My friends, yes, one ark, one humanity, one state, one country, one people, for the sake of the poor, for the sake of those who have been forgotten. Let us come together and work together regardless of who we are. Thank you. Thank you.
I've got just a couple of things to posture, if you don't mind, before we get to the questions. Let me just share, this is just a small sentence from a book by Walter Brueggemann. It's entitled Truth Speaks to Power, which I think really gets to the public policy in religious interaction kind of piece. It says, the occupants of power are of necessity always seeking out versions of truth that are compatible with present power arrangements. Conversely, outsiders to present power arrangements are always proposing a counter-truth that will permit and legitimate counter-arrangements of power. I think in our founding fathers, fresh from the European wars, religious wars, saw the wisdom that if this country was going to hold together, it needed to, in some way, disestablish itself from kind of religious influence. Virginia was Episcopalian, Maryland was largely Catholic, the Massachusetts was pretty much Congregationalist. My own forebears suffered religious persecution at the hands of the Congregationalists. I mean, it needed this kind of disestablishment to survive as a union. But ever since, there's this tension of truth, religious truth, that our forefathers decided could only have the power of persuasion, and I think wisely so. It's very dangerous when religion has the U.S. Marines or the IRS. We're in dangerous territory at that point. However, there is the power which tends to reinforce itself and seek to kind of consolidate and maintain that. Always, I think, our religious traditions are speaking for the least powerful. And that comes from our own sense. I think this is, I'm going to check this out, if this is a common theological principle across these three faith groups. It's the construct of righteousness, which has everything to do with right relationship, which has everything to do with justice. And that concept of right relationship is a primary driver, theological driver, for all these things that we do, and we kind of list down the way. Am I correct in that, down the row here?
Amen.
Okay, I mean, this is a space we've got in common, and it's a theological commonality here. So this is at the very basis of our religious beliefs. We hold this value, and it occasions us to be in tension constantly with those that are in power. And in some sense saying, hey, don't just get more and more powerful. Remember right relationship. Remember the poor. Remember the dispossessed. Remember those whose voices aren't heard. Remember those whose voices need to be heard. So I'll leave it with that. Let's have your questions. Yes.
My name is Austin Setzer, and I appreciate you all being here tonight and speaking with us. I have a question for any of you, all of you. Exactly what is the statement meant by poverty? I'm not really clear on, I mean, I understand from a humanitarian perspective that it's not good to have poverty, but once we eliminate poor housing, lack of food, lack of water, the necessities in life, Then a new poverty would arise, which means that people have less luxury items than others. That would be the new poverty, right? Because the definition that I looked up is the state of one who lacks a usual or social acceptable amount of money or material possessions. So I'm just kind of confused on if we need to get rid of poverty, how would we go about it, and exactly what type of poverty do we need to get rid of?
Somebody like to take it? Yes, Rabbi.
Well, I think there are, in my tradition, there's a definition of when a person is poor, but I think you hit the bottom line of the human rights. What is it as a human being that we should have? What is the right that a human being has in any society, whether it's the United States or someplace in Asia or Africa? And that is a home, a job, food, shelter. I mean, those are the clothing. Those are the basic lines. You seem to be addressing the question of equality above that. The biblical tradition that I come from doesn't require equality of outcome. It does require equality of opportunity, and makes clear that there has to be a social welfare net underneath a society that doesn't depend on whether a person is worthy or lazy or ill. It depends on their being a human being. So poverty is something that the Bible opposes. There's no nobility in it. It's something that a society, that's the tzedek. Tzedakah is what the charity that we give to help somebody in need doesn't in any way exhaust our religious obligation to create a society with a basic level of human rights and economic rights, which includes the right to have a job, a meaningful job, to be productive. Now, how you get there is way beyond the scope of tonight. Those are religious values, and we can and should argue about how we can create them more effectively in the society. Most people and most religious community people think that we should have a minimum wage as a way of, but there is an alternative perspective on that. That's not the subject of tonight, but it is an important religious subject. How do we get to a standard of human rights for everybody in our society, everyone created as an image of God?
Thank you. Anybody else?
I want to add one piece to that too. The tradition, our traditions that we share, also speak to the fact that if my luxuries, which you were speaking to, come at a cost of another, then I have been unjust. So that, and that's for me personally a constant calculation. Is the car I drive, the house I live in, the clothes I wear, the things I enjoy that are probably luxury, have they come at cost to another human being?
I would add the tradition in Islam that says God does not accept your prayers, nor would God hear your prayers if you have filled your stomach and went to sleep knowing that your neighbor went to sleep hungry. For me, that's a basic start for what poverty is and is not that we're trying to fight. As you heard, I have been to 68 countries. And having seen what I have seen in my life, people who have no access to health care, basic health care, I'm not talking about well-developed hospitals with computers, have access to insulin, have access to Advil, to Tylenol, to needles, to basic needs of education, basic needs of security. What is happening now in Central Africa is very heartbreaking. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. And all of this is shaped by the belief in Islam that the dignity of the human being is more important in the eyes of God than the dignity of the house of worship in Mecca. So a building comes and goes, but the human being, when he or she goes, will never come back again. That is what we have to be after.
I'll leave the sort of religious implications to the religious leaders. I think for the political purposes, I mean, the president's talked about the defining challenge of our time as he sees it is income inequality. looking at this squeezed middle class in terms of the ability to stay in your home, have your children go to college, not be in a ruinous financial situation because you co-signed for your children to go to college, not to be saddled with student loan debt for 40 years after you graduate, if you graduate at all. And the way that, I mean, you poll it all the time, people around the country feel like they're working harder and harder and harder and falling further and further behind. And so you hear the formulation the president often uses is folks who work hard, take care of their responsibilities, and play by the rules should be able to get ahead in this country. That's the basic American bargain. And that has been challenged in the last couple of decades, especially as you've seen the stratification among sort of the top 1% doing pretty well, the middle class being challenged on every front, and folks in deep, deep poverty falling further and further behind them and their children. And that sort of upsetting the basic American bargain of if you work hard enough, you should be able to get by and not live in poverty. So I'll leave it on a political answer. That's the best I can give you.
Thank you.
My name is Joy Bernstein. I would really be interested in how Imam Hendi and Rabbi Sirota relate to the issue of the BDS and how divisive it has been on campuses and elsewhere, where dialogue between Muslims and Jews on this issue has become a largely unwalkable minefield, and where Israelis and Jews are pretty much demonized and not really invited into the dialogue unless they turn on Israel. I would also be interested in Mr. Monteiro's view on this. Thank you.
Who's first?
Go ahead, you go first. The politics,
Thanks, guys.
The government first.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, just to be clear, I left the White House in November, so I'm just speaking on my own. I mean, but you've seen, for anyone who reads the newspaper, just a few weeks ago, Secretary Kerry mentions the BDS is, everybody know what BDS is?
I wouldn't assume that. Describe it.
Do you want to talk about it? Yeah, the boycott, divestment, sanctions. So it's the economic challenge to Israel in terms of their policies when it comes to the Palestinians. The response has been having companies, denominations, some American denominations have actually encouraged folks joining a boycott movement to boycott Israeli companies that are operating in disputed territories, settlements, divestment if you have investments in Israel, selling them off, or sanctions. And so Secretary Kerry, and I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said already, but he, in the last couple of weeks, was speaking with leaders of the Israeli government and simply remarking, look at the traction that BDS is getting in Europe. And if that continues, and you see European governments start to boycott or divest or impose sanctions on Israel until they change their policies with respect to the Palestinians, the impact it will have on the Israeli economy. Tom Friedman did a pretty, I think, solid article recently, I think it was called The Third Intifada, saying, well, the first two intifadas, the first two armed resistance movements of Palestinians against Israeli government forces failed because they were largely military. And the Israeli military, you know, it's tough to beat. This third one is sort of the heir of, he tied it to Mandela's passing. As Mandela has passed, folks are looking to what is the next social justice fight in the world, and they look at the way that Palestinians have been treated in Israel, and they see that as the next front in that struggle. And so the economic struggle against Israel, which will translate into devastating impacts on the Israeli economy. So anyway, long story long, I already talked too long. Secretary Kerry mentioned that to leaders of the Israeli government, and the response from them was basically, we're not going to be bullied by simply remarking and observing that you can't ignore it because this movement isn't losing steam. You know, the president since day one, I know, has been working behind the scenes and in some cases publicly over the first term and definitely in the second term to try and bring at least the parties to talk directly again. And now you have direct talks, but there's a lot of serious points of disagreement between them. But the BDS movement is real, certainly, and it's gaining strength, not losing it. So,
thanks. I want to bring it to more to the level of the campus. If what you say is true, which is partially true, it's an enormous tragedy that Jewish students and Muslim students on campus do not speak to each other or allow Israeli-Palestinian politics or other politics to prevent them from dialoguing and understanding each other. We will lose those of us who are in those two communities if we can't talk to each other. And if we are honest with each other, we have to listen to what everybody on each side says. It would be a tragedy to import a lack of progress into our interfaith relations on campus. I was a campus chaplain for 28 years, and we worked very hard for Hillel and the Muslim Students Association to work together on our common interest, which is enormous and great, but not to pretend that we may have differences. From a personal perspective, I would say that it is impossible to be a Zionist and a supporter of Israel without being a supporter of Palestine and Palestinian nationalism, and vice versa. It is impossible to support Palestinian self-determination without correspondingly supporting Jewish self-determination in the state of Israel. The two will neither will succeed without the other. So I don't see it as a zero-sum game, but I see it as a tragedy, a continuing tragedy. And I think Jewish students and Muslim students, for that matter, Christian students who are their friends and brothers and sisters on campus, should be discussing these things in an atmosphere of openness and listening, careful listening.
I would add by saying, when we speak about the Arab-Israeli conflict, we always say Jews and Muslims, and we stop there. It's a mistake. Remember that before 1948, almost 27% of Palestinians were Christians, almost 1/3. And now when we speak of Palestine, we speak of the Christians too. When we speak of Israel, we speak of the Christians too. So Christians are a part of that reality, of that painful narrative and hopeful narrative too. We always need to say that. Number two, we all have passionate stories to tell. But dialogue is about mastering the art of listening. Listening means sit back, bite your tongue, and allow your mind to, not only your heart, but also your mind to digest someone else's story as it is told in the way it is told by the other. And that's what we need to do on campus. Now, I agree with you that on some campuses there's absolutely zero dialogue between Muslims and Jews. On some campuses, it's absolutely the opposite. If you were to come to Georgetown University, GSA and MSA work on daily basis, whether on issues related to the Arab-Israeli conflict or issues related to preparing sandwiches to feed the poor in downtown Washington, D.C. Last semester, we sponsored a screening of a movie that just came out, and I advise you to do it here, called The Other Son, The Other Son. It's a real movie, about two mothers, one Palestinian and one Jewish Israeli, both of whom gave children at the same time in the same hospital. And guess what? The children were switched. And they only discovered it at age 19. And you need to be there to cry, to smile, to feel we are all in this together.
Thank you. Yes.
Good evening. I'm Sotan Chaudhary. I'm not a student. I come through the courtesy of Reverend Caseman. I'm from Islamic Community Center of Potomac. How great to see all faith groups, clergies, imams, and reverends, and of course Paul, the White House person, to see together. It's great to be, and that can only happen in America, so I'm very grateful for that. What I want to comment on, actually, question too. When we hear in the press national elections, we hear religious right supporting anti-poverty programs, anti-child care programs, or anti-immigrant programs. So now, do these interfaith communities need to do a little bit more to be in the limelight and the press, say, hey, you know, interfaith community is also strong, and we support the pro-humanity programs. And how could we do so? Possibly college is a great place to start, but also in the public at large. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Reverend Nagley, you want to
Another question, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, we got it. One more question.
Thank you. I'm Dominique Reichlich. I'm with the 9/11 Unity Walk. Every September, every house of worship opens their doors, and this is one way, as you say, to know one another, to do service with one another. I wanted to ask you about something that we've been focusing on, which is getting youth and families. We've been inspired by Ibu Patel and have an interfaith youth service group where middle and high school students and their families do service together and learn about each other's faiths. It's been incredibly powerful, powerful personal stories. And I feel like on every social issue, we're seeing that it's getting driven by young people. How can we here and around the world support those efforts to reach young people? I think that so much of the time it's people of power. I liked Imam Hendi saying that we always speak about Jews and Muslims instead of, you know, about the political entities, and I think a lot of times religion is used as a wedge for power. And so children don't have power, but at the same time they're our future, and they're the ones that can affect this change. And how do we, as the sort of vast middle, make ourselves heard more? It seems like it's the people who are trying to shift the power that are the loudest, but I think we're the biggest group. How can we be more at the forefront and making more of these opportunities to know each other? Thank you so much. This has been a great evening.
Well, both of the comments are in the same line, how we can promote the spirit of what we're talking about here and bring it down to a level to the campus and even to younger. I don't know if Reverend Caseman, if in Montgomery County there's a plan to do that with the work that you're doing. The Interfaith Council of Greater Washington just had 2 weeks ago a meeting of younger generation of interfaith leaders. They had 100 leaders from around Washington who met to work on precisely those questions, promote interfaith programming. That's what we do in Clergy Beyond Borders. We model this. We traveled around. We haven't particularly worked with younger generations. We've spoken on campuses. I don't know if there's an interfaith association here at Montgomery College. We were part of reestablishing one at the University of Maryland, but with so many colleges in this area, you'd think that there would be an opportunity for that modeling and getting together between campuses. So, but other Ibu Patel and the programs that Paul talked about from the White House are good examples of working together in community service, and particularly. That's what they focus on. So if you can get that grant for Montgomery College, they'll give you some funds in order to model that and do it much more publicly. Then that's the work that we're doing in Clergy Beyond Borders, exactly what you call for.
I always say that what makes any religion good religion, in my mind, is when that religion looks after the needs of all human beings, regardless of their background. And any religion that undermines any human being is not a religion I want to be a part of. And therefore, we can work with everyone out there to advance the cause of all of humanity. I would also say that today, we met, me and Jerry, and we were talking about the need to do a caravan, a bus, traveling through America, carrying high school students to meet at each other's houses of worship and write their experiences in a book that we will publish. And we hope to do a few of those caravans across America, and hopefully we will succeed enough in building a momentum that we can take it to other countries. On Sunday, I'll be traveling to Norway, and this will be one of my ideas, talking about in Norway with the issues they are suffering from there, doing a small caravan of youth traveling from school to school and religious community to religious community. Again, since it's my last time to speak, I'll say My friends, please remember that this is one ark, one humanity. You are more important in my eyes than me in my own eyes. And I hope I am more important in your eyes than you in your own eyes. Let us look after each other. That is what I hope to see from young generation like yours.
I only want to add that this work is going on, and you know that. And so your voice is to say, we know this work is going on, but also there is no way that this hard, intentional work is going to have the same sexiness as what's going on in Arizona. All right? Right? But you know what's going on, and you're a part of it. And hopefully some great news coverage will come of the caravan, and that would be wonderful. But what's most important is that you know, and that you put your feet on the ground and your hearts in gear, and just let it happen through your own efforts.
I think I'm going to let Paul have the last word here.
Thanks. I would just, on the religious right question, I would just say part of that I think is a stereotype and a fiction. The religious right today is not what it was even 10 years ago. You're seeing, again, with a lot of these shifts, look at what young evangelicals are doing. Young evangelicals, like 50,000 of them got together around human trafficking in Atlanta through the Passion Conference. Like there are things that are happening where you're seeing churches lose membership because they're starting new churches. Churches that meet in the evening, for example. You wear casual clothes, for example, or you do a lot of community service, and whatever else you do, you don't refight the culture wars of the last 30 years, because young people generally are not interested in that. The goal, in my mind, should not be to create a religious left, because I think there's a danger in that too. I think Dr. King, when he wrote in Strength to Love, he wrote about the church because he was a minister, but the role of faith communities is not to be the servant of the state or the master of the state. It's to be the conscience of the state. And it's a dangerous place when folks try to line up religious groups on one side of the political aisle or the other, because I think it cheapens the religion that people hold. And on the attracting young people, I think, as I just mentioned, what you're seeing is, a lot of the data shows it, young people want to do things. They want to express their faith through action. And I found that folks that give them a way to do that, to create their own pathway to serve, is a good way to do it. Recognizing a lot of this lives online, a lot of this connections happen virtually, but you have so many examples through history of where civil rights movement, Birmingham church bombing, who are the folks getting arrested and going to jail? It's young people, because they were the only ones who took the risk to put themselves out there. So I think the hunger is there, the desire to do things is there. And what they're doing is creating their own pathways to manifest the beliefs they hold in the 21st century, where the way their parents did it, it's not the way they want to do it. So, remains to be seen what happens next.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you, participants here.